Joining us right now via telephone is attorney Mike Berry of First Liberty. It's a great case that First Liberty is representing Coach Joe Kennedy, a guy who was fired from his job coaching high school football because of 15 seconds of silent prayer. And to give us the story, attorney Mike Berry joins us now. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Semper Fi. It's good to have you back on. We talked to you several months back about your representing Navy SEALs and other members of the military in the vaccination mandate case. Real quick, how did that turn out?
Well, the case is still ongoing. We won in the lower court, and the Department of Justice has appealed, so we're now in the Court of Appeals, just one step below the Supreme Court, which is obviously what we're talking about this morning, right? Another Supreme Court case.
Yeah. It is kind of a crazy thing to think 15 seconds can determine your life and your future, but maybe you can give us the backstory.
Yeah, I mean, Coach Kennedy, speaking of military and Semper Fi, he also served in the Marines for 20 years. He retired as a Marine, and that's what led him to become a football coach back in his hometown of Bremerton, Washington. He did that for about 8 years, and after every game, he made a commitment to God that he was going to give thanks for the opportunity to be a coach. He prayed. Initially, it started as him by himself, but then later on, some of his players began to ask him whether they were allowed to pray with him or pray near him, and his answer was a classic Coach Kennedy response, which is it's a free country, you can do whatever you want. At least that's what he thought, because the school district got involved when they found out what he was doing. They investigated, and even though their investigation revealed no evidence that any player had ever been coerced or forced to participate, and there were no complaints ever in his entire 8 years of doing this, they told him that he had to stop because they were worried that, in their words, they said that any visibly demonstrative religious conduct that could be viewed by people in the audience, right, they might think that the government was formally establishing religion by allowing that, which I know sounds ridiculous, but that's what happens when, school district lawyers get involved.
That's the first thing I think about every time I see a coach making some sort of religious gesture. The government, it's really oppressing me now, every single time.
Exactly. And so, and the real irony here is, Coach himself has told the story many times now about he had a pretty rough upbringing, spent most of his youth in foster homes and group homes, got kicked out of more schools than he can recall. And he said, by his own admission, he was a pretty bad kid, caused a lot of trouble. And he said, but so of all the things for him to get fired for, he thinks it's pretty funny that it was for praying.
Yeah.
But that's what he got fired for. Was he, at the end of the day, ultimately what led to his firing was he said, look, I don't want to pray with anybody else. I want to pray by myself. I will do it in a time and a place and a manner when the students, their post-game tradition is they would shake hands with the other team or high-five the other team, and then they would go to the stands and sing the fight song. He said, I'll do it then, so that there's no way they can be near me, right? They're over in the stands singing the fight song. All the focus is on them. None of the focus is on me. I'll kneel for 15 to 30 seconds. You won't even hear me. You barely see me, and I'll just give thanks, and we'll be done. And the school district said, if you do it, you're fired. So that's what happened. We sued, went all the way, went through the Ninth Circuit, up to the Supreme Court, and on Monday of this week, the court heard arguments in the case, and I would say based on the way the arguments went, we're cautiously optimistic. I'm going to predict that we'll win. What the margin will be could be 6-3, could be 5-4. At the end of the day, just like in football, you just need more than the other side has when the clock hits zero.
It's funny to think about. Some of the Supreme Court justices asked some hypothetical questions earlier this week, and one of those questions was, would this even be a thing if he was standing up for climate change, supposed climate change, or anything else? And it's insane to think about that a coach just taking a few minutes or a few seconds to pray is so scandalous. What do you think about that?
It's really interesting, and Justice Thomas also asked the question about what if he, instead of praying, he decided he wanted to kneel and protest during the national anthem.
Right. And we've seen that before.
I thought that was an interesting hypothetical because Now, it didn't happen at the Supreme Court, but when we were at the lower court, we actually had a friend of the court brief that was submitted by 2 local football coaches from the Seattle area. And they submitted this friend of the court brief saying that their practice, at least when it was still kind of the thing to do this, is when their students, when the athletes would kneel to protest the Black Lives Matter in support of the Black Lives Matter movement during the national anthem, they kneeled with their players, right? Wow. So they were with their players doing, a form of political expression, and during the national anthem, and they said nobody said a word to us. Everybody said, "Oh, this is so great that the coaches are behind their players and they're doing this to their players." And they said, "Well, if we have the right to kneel in protest, then surely he has the right to kneel in prayer, especially if he's doing it in a way where he's not with his players, right? We kneeled with our players. He's kneeling, alone. Why doesn't he have the right to do that?" And so, to me, unfortunately, that brief didn't get filed at the Supreme Court level, but it did get filed at the lower court level, and I think that's exactly right. That you don't have to agree with why they're kneeling in protest, but we can all agree that they should have the right to do that. And if they have the right to do that, then Coach Kennedy should have the right to kneel in prayer. And, the other side tried to make this all about, well, the students might feel pressured or coerced. And once again, we go back to, you can create any crazy hypothetical you want. At the end of the day, the school district itself did the investigation. And the school district itself was the one that said, yeah, there was never any evidence that anyone felt pressured or coerced. There was never any evidence that people complained. So, you gotta rule the cases based on the facts that are before you. In fact, one of the justices said to the opposing counsel at one point, let's assume the facts of this case are what the facts of this case actually are, right? So in other words, let's quit making up all these crazy hypotheticals, and let's just go off of what was this case actually about. And I think that was a pretty telling comment by one of the justices.
When do you expect to receive the ruling?
The big blockbuster decisions, the court usually holds in reserve until the very last week, which is the last week of June. So that's what we're anticipating. This is going to be one of the 3 biggest headline-grabbing cases of the year, of the term, that is. So probably the end of June, which actually isn't that far away.
No, it's right around the corner, month and a half, 2 months away now. But that's going to happen at the same time then as the Roe v. Wade case.
Yeah, Dobbs, that's the case you're referring to, is the abortion bill out of Mississippi. And then there's a big Second Amendment case as well out of New York. So
that's going to be earth-shattering. You're going to get this decision when the earth is in great turmoil. That's going to be very interesting. Yep. How do you see that?
Oh, no, look, at the end of the day, a win is a win. If you win your case at the Supreme Court, that's ultimately what we want for Coach. And First Liberty will be thrilled, right, that after 7 years of fighting for his First Amendment rights. And so if the Dobbs decision comes down, and hopefully that's a good decision, then that'll be the icing on the cake, right? 2 great decisions in the same week or the same day. And then you've got another case on the Second Amendment. So this year is going to be quite the doozy. You've got a pro-life case, a religious liberty case, and a Second Amendment case, all potentially coming out on the same day, or at least the same week or so. And then let's not forget, Justice Breyer just heard his last oral argument of his career, more than likely. Unless something weird happens and he decides to withdraw his retirement. So we're going to have a new justice as well. And so that's going to be all the buzz. So these are fascinating times at the Supreme Court. If you're somebody who pays close attention to the court, because you've got 3 blockbuster cases and a new justice to talk about. There's going to be a lot to talk about for the entire summer.
Now, unless I'm mistaken about this, doesn't the Supreme Court traditionally side with religious institution on religious liberty cases?
Religious liberty has an incredible track record at the Supreme Court when the case is just purely a religious liberty case, right? So, when there are other issues that are overlapping, things get a little more complicated. But you're right, and I think there's a reason for that. I think even the progressive justices have to acknowledge that religious liberty has a really cherished and special place in our nation's constitutional order, right? I mean, it's in the First Amendment, and it's actually the first clause of the First Amendment, right? The religion clauses. And you go all the way back to the founding of our country and many decisions from the Supreme Court since then. And almost every single one of them, with very few exceptions, protects religious liberty. And that's because anybody who studied American history understands that's really one of the bedrock principles the country was founded upon, right? It was this notion of religious liberty. In fact, the people who founded the country were fleeing religious persecution. So it makes sense that they wanted to establish a new government that protected religious freedom. And so what's really important is that we continue to have judges and Supreme Court justices that understand that, appreciate that, and have the courage and the fortitude to continue to hold that up as the law in this country.
So are you at all, or is First Liberty at all concerned about the appointment of very progressive justices to the court? Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson has a very progressive record, something we've covered on this show a lot. So do you feel like the future of this court could be going in the other direction, and religious liberty might be in great jeopardy in the coming years, decades, potentially?
Well, there's certainly to be a lot to be concerned with soon-to-be Justice Jackson's record. That's absolutely clear. And First Liberty did a lot of research into her record on the lower court, both the Court of Appeals and the District Court. There's a lot to be very concerned with there. But let's keep the big picture in mind. You're replacing Justice Breyer, a liberal justice, pretty far left justice, and you're replacing him with another liberal justice. So you're getting sort of a 1-for-1, right? The biggest difference is now it's somebody who's much younger, so she's going to, Justice Jackson will be on the court for many more years to come. But that's, to me, what I tell people is that's why it's so important to vote. Get out and vote during the elections, your local elections, as well as the presidential election, because President Biden himself said, presidents come and go, but Supreme Court justices last for generations. And he's exactly right about that. There aren't that many things that I agree with him about, but I absolutely agree with him about that. And that's what we're going to have with Justice Jackson. So although you're replacing a liberal justice with a liberal justice, so I don't feel like we're losing a whole lot there. It is concerning that now, yes, we are going to have a liberal justice to contend with for 20, 30 years plus. And that's what happens.
And the threat
that's the way our system is set up.
And the potential threat of stacking the court, do you feel like that's more rhetoric than reality? Because they don't really have the votes to do that, or how do you see that?
That is a threat that continues to rear its head, which is, I'm glad you brought that up. That's another area that First Liberty has really done a lot of research and analysis. There's an incredible amount of information about court packing on our website, firstliberty.org. The history of court packing, why it's such a bad idea from really an analytical standpoint. And I predict that if the Dobbs case, the pro-life case, Coach Kennedy, and the Second Amendment case all come out the right way, right, in favor of conservative principles and the constitutional principles, I predict that we're going to see the left really ratchet up the rhetoric on court packing. And it's going to come down to what happens in the midterms and what happens in the 2024 election. Because if they win, if they manage to keep both houses of Congress, and if they manage to keep the White House, they've said themselves, their own words are, nothing's off the table. Everything is on the table, which of course that's a dog whistle for saying we are going to try to pack the court. So that's what I predict that will happen if the Democrats keep the Senate and the House in the midterms, and if they keep the White House in 2024, we will see some effort to pack the courts.
Yeah, but we got record inflation, wars and rumors of wars. We have immigration that's out of control. I mean, even Democrats, even liberals are now, really pushing back on the immigration policy. And you have the record lowest job approval rating for the U.S. president. I mean, do we really think they're going to keep control?
Well, the way I look at that is we have no excuse, right? Those of us who disagree with all the things that you just laid out, who are suffering from those things, you have every motivation, every reason to get out, register to vote now, well in advance, and get out and actually vote. Make your voice heard. You have a right in this country that millions of people around the planet would die and are dying for the right to have their voice heard. We have that right in this country. We will lose that right, along with many other freedoms like Coach Kennedy is experiencing, if we don't exercise that right. So these are all things that we all complain about, that we've all experienced and suffered from to one degree or another. Then use that as motivation to get out and make a change. Get rid of the people who are causing these things to happen, and put in people who are going to put in policies that you agree with and are going to make your life better.
Let's go back to Coach Kennedy for a second, and just the general topic of religious liberty as an American. And the fun saying as an enlisted Marine was USMC, you signed the mother bleeping contract. We had this notion that we would give up our rights as citizens to become federal employees, essentially. But do teachers, are they no longer citizens under the U.S. Constitution? Can they really say that you're not allowed to have any public display of religion? You can't wear your crucifixes. You can't kneel in prayer off by yourself. You can't even mention the fact that you have this faith. When we see teacher after teacher after teacher across this country cram their gender ideology down the throats of parents and students alike, why are Christians the ones who are forced to keep silent?
Well, you bring up a number of great points. So first, no American loses their rights in this country just because of the job that they happen to have or who their employer happens to be. And that's what the other side, that's what our opposing counsel, and I should make note, the school district, Bremerton School District in this case, is not represented by sort of a typical, what we would call a white shoe law firm. They're represented by an organization called the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. So let's be clear about what the case is about. The other side's attorneys is called the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. That's what they're arguing for. That's what they want. And they would want us to believe, and they want the court to agree that, yes, you do lose your rights. You lose your First Amendment rights when you decide to get a government paycheck. And my response is, show me where it says that in the Constitution. Show me where it says that in federal law. And guess what? Newsflash, it doesn't. It doesn't say it anywhere. And when it comes to our rights as Americans, and you mentioned serving in the military. As a Marine myself, I'm sure you're familiar with this notion of military chaplains, right?
Yeah.
They wear the uniform of the United States. They're officers in the military, but yet they also perform a role as a religious leader and a clergy. And that's whether they're a Christian chaplain, a Jewish rabbi chaplain, a Muslim chaplain, a Buddhist chaplain, whatever the case happens to be, they are religious leaders and representatives of their faith groups. And yet nobody stops and says, yeah, well, they shouldn't be allowed to do that because they get paid by the government. Their paycheck comes from the government. And so, it's ridiculous for the other side, for the school district, to try to make that argument, against Coach Kennedy. That's what they tried to do. I think the court's going to reject it, and I think the court should reject it.
Praise be to God. Attorney Michael Berry from First Liberty, firstliberty.org. God bless you. Thank you for your time today. We'll be praying for a great outcome for Coach Kennedy and First Liberty. Thank you for your time. God bless you. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Praise be to God. That's going to do it for hour number one.